Hello and welcome to Real Hi-Fi Help. In this video, I will be talking about aging process of equipment. So here we are with the Macintosh MA 8000 integrated amp. This is one of my favorite Macintosh amps, and it isn't as powerful as the bigger monoblocks, but I still think it's better. But let me just talk about aging process. So brand spanking new, cold out of the box. When you're buying this, you're getting it out of your car. You're about to connect it. First, you have to get it like out of the box. When you put this thing on for the first time, it can easily sound very two-dimensional, very flat, very cold, and has a small sound stage. So you have to realize that not just with Macintosh, but transistor gear in general, it has to be broken in to sound more natural. So it just seems more inviting, more free, a tiny bit more, warm-ish in sound. So Macintosh transistor gear in general, have it on standby if it's possible. So you're not just turning it on for the first time so it's cold, because it makes the sound more harsh and just not as nice and big and free and effortless as it could be. So of course, when you're running with A-class gear, it's easier for that to start from zero and then warm up the amp like within an hour or two, and then it's like ready to go. That's usually a lot easier. But I'm just talking primarily about these typical AB watt amps out there that the majority of people use in the world. So that's just to let you know about this first part of the process here. So I also feel that this particular amp here can be very analytical and cold in the start, but over the years, well, once you have it, not just this amp, but many amps actually, sound tends to smooth out the older it gets and the more playing time it has had. So usually, even though this could be a bit analytical, cold, closed in 2D in the start, it can be a lot more tube-ish, perhaps 5, 10, and especially 20 years later, And so I think it's important to remember that, because a lot of new gear just doesn't quite release the sound. It's kind of a bit reserved. It's a bit 2D. It's flat, edgy, but like a good wine, it matures and it stretches the sound and it creates a more effortless type of flow. And we have to kind of understand that keeping gear on is a natural way of making it tired. And when you're making something that is just perhaps a tiny bit modern, edgy, cold in sound, when you're making it tired, that does in a natural way make it a bit more ripe, a bit more mature, a bit more nice, a bit more where you can tolerate its, I wouldn't say deficiencies, but you're just basically taking something and you're stretching it to its full potential. That's what I'm trying to say. So, and in probably like 30 years time or something like that, many of the components will, not very uncommon, they'll be overstretched and perhaps start to create a bit of extra noise. And some of those components might have to be replaced. Those could be caps, maybe even resistors, electrolytes, stuff like that. Like most gear on the market, I'm talking about most gear on the market. But let's just talk about Macintosh. Macintosh is known for having products that last for many years. So I mean, I think that's one of the great reasons for why, if you want to go with Macintosh, that's like one of the main reasons, high resale value, and the stuff lasts for a long time. It looks good, fantastic unboxing value. Yeah, it's not the best sound on the market, but it's still up there. It still does some impressive stuff. So yeah, those things alone make Macintosh a very special brand in itself. So kudos to Macintosh for really basically being one of the few companies that can do that. Let's just take a look at this here. I used to have this before, the YBA Passion 100 model, and I couldn't recognize this. If I turned this amp off and then the next day I will turn it on and just listen to like 15-30 minutes of music, I'm telling you guys, I could not recognize the sound. The sound stage was like a third of the size. It was just like struggling getting the music over to me. And it was just an uphill battle. I just didn't want to listen to this amp when it was cold. But, having it on for several weeks, my God, that made it better. And especially when it was upgraded, it's still like 3, 5, 10 times better. So it just goes to show that when you have standby function on, especially transistor gear, that could be like the deal breaker, the one thing that makes you want to own transistor gear. At least it was for me. Most gear out there, I really don't like transistor gear. I'm talking about. I really don't like when you can only turn it on and off, and there's no form of warming up the circuit. There's no standby function. That for me is personally very disappointing. So, and a bit the same with tube sound, a bit the same. For some, it can be a bit too much to start with when you've got a new tube amp. And maybe because they're used to like a lower quality standard that is a bit more forgiving, a lower quality standard of tubes. So I sometimes get this feeling from people that are used to, let's just say Macintosh MC275. They probably have like a 10, 20-year-old version of that. And they're used to this like very soft, limited, lower level warmth type of sound. And then they get into this like insane high class tube sound. Let's just say it's Negro or something like that, or even like the highest models of Arduino. But when they get over to that, they don't mentally realize that you're comparing a product that has a lower level of warmth with a newer product that has just been produced that perhaps isn't fully broken in. And the thing with high level tube gear when it hasn't been fully broken in is that it almost it's like a punch in the nose. You get like insane amount of details live, and it can just become, for some people, especially the older generation, it can become for some people just too much, like way too much. And I'm just here to tell those guys that I actually think that those few people that think it's too much, that if they just would own that gear for a while, or perhaps buy it used later when it's like 5 to 20 years old, I think that when they listen to the exact same gear, they would realize that it's kind of more stretched, it's softened up, and it settles more. And to quite a big degree, I remember my friend when he had his Ongaku and it was completely new, I was like, to start with, I was like, damn, that's like getting a coffee enema while you're on some kind of a ferry ride in Disneyland, and it's cold and someone slapping you. I mean, in a way, it was like really amazing, but it's a process. It's like a wine where there is a process of developing the sound from start when you get it to breaking it in, which is very different from product to product. And then once it's been broken in, it could still take 5, 10, 20 years before it kind of, flattens out. And I wouldn't say gives up, but, it gets more reserved and more settled. And that goes with a lot of higher end tube gear. So to me personally, I like the process. I like the process of getting new tube gear that's high level at the top, and just mentally following that process throughout the years. And while all of this stuff is happening, I like to go through different cables, through different units, like a new CD player, new DAC, and stuff like that. I enjoy that process, but I know the reason why I'm making this video is to illustrate to people that you could be trying a high-class piece of gear now, and you could perhaps have some kind of reservation about it, not knowing where the sound is starting, when it has been broken in, and knowing the sound from when it has been broken in to when it's like totally flattened out, and and approaching perhaps the sound that you want. So just to let people know about that, it especially counts with products like, I would say, Negro, which is ultra revealing. On the analytical part, it's very much on the analytic part. And I would also say it counts for a lot of products like Audio Note, because we are not talking about a stock sound that is just locked into a certain condition. We're talking about something that is so reactive that it has a personality. It has a way of changing depending on the age of it. Now, it's not going to just suddenly go from one day to another sound very different. It's just like on a long process, looking at perhaps from when it's new to when it's broken into 5-10 years later to 20-30 years later. Even though nothing has changed with that amp, even though nothing has changed in your system, the sound still might seem quite a bit different. And personally, I like it in all of its stages. Perhaps not the first couple of hours when something is new at high tube level, because that's really almost unbearable for most people, because it's just so the first couple of hours, I would say, is like horrible with a lot of top gear. But just know this, and I think people have to also realize when they listen to gear at shows, when they listen to expensive gear, not necessarily Audio, a lot of other brands also, when they have this really expensive gear, transistor gear, tube gear, that's part of why it sounds so crappy. That's part of why you can't understand why it's so expensive. That's part of why you consider perhaps your own piece of equipment that isn't quite as good to be better, value-wise or perhaps overall. There is a process that happens in the start. I've heard it several times when I've heard new top gear. And it's just to let you guys know that this is a thing that really exists. Strange, but logical. And again, going back to Negro, which is a very analytical, neutral-ish type of sound. I didn't like listening to that some few places, and I didn't really realize that was because it was completely new, and that was because there was a bit of wrong matching with equipment, and because of the standard tubes that were used So just going alone, just going past that first couple of 100 hours listening to it, that alone will make a huge difference. Then there's like the tubes, getting some proper tubes to it, and then it's like, yeah, then it's like halfway there, sounding, very very natural. And then there's like, the rest of the stuff, which is a whole other game in itself, where you have to pair it with the proper stuff, and have a proper room and all that. So just to let you guys know that world does exist. And I tried this with my last amp and some other amps. Think about this: if you don't have a lot of watts driving a heavy speaker, I did have that before. The Verity Fidelio speaker, I think it's around 85 dB or something like that, crazy. That can easily make an amplifier very tired, so it becomes very, rolled back towards the wall, pushed down, and you have to kind of yank the volume a bit so sound comes out, and then when it comes out in bits and pieces. When I did this, when I ran my Tube Guru amp on the Fidelio speakers, I noticed that the tubes became overly warm and kind of, they became warm, tired, and kind of slightly rolled off the more I listened to music. And I find that very interesting. So if you have like an amp that isn't very powerful, and it's driving this very heavy set of speakers, not only is it limiting the dynamics and the volume, so you can't turn it up a lot, but it also is wearing down the tubes quite fast. And some people, it can probably sound overly warm, overly thin, but in my case, it made a sound that was overly warm, overly heavy, tired. And just moving that amp over to something like a 10 decibel more efficient speaker. Of course, you can't just say 10 decibel. There's also the ohm curve and all that stuff you have to take into consideration. But generally, when you move up in efficiency, suddenly you notice that same amp that seemed slow suddenly becomes a lot more lively. But if you've run that amp for a while on a heavy speaker, you could have worn down the tubes. So you might even have to get some proper tubes, because even though they're still functioning, they could still be a bit dead and tired and lifeless, because of that heavy pull that they had to do throughout the years. So yeah, it's just to let you guys know that this world does exist. It's not your mind playing tricks on you. Stuff like this happens. And when you're moving up in class, things become more reactive, and things like this change more, because when you're stuck in more of this type of world, things are more locked, things are more consistent, there are more features. You can potentially do more things, versatility wise, compatibility wise, but you don't get something that is quite as evolving from start to end. It's kind of, it will change with time, it will become a bit more smooth and nice and natural and all of that, but it's like a limited area that it moves within. It's still a noticeable difference, it is, but if I took like a really high level piece of transistor or tube piece of gear, and I did the same process from start to end, that would move a hell of a lot more, and it would probably surprise you. I think it would surprise you how the life process of that gear, how much it changes, at the very highest level. But yeah, still around this level, which is like lower than the Macintosh with the standard components in it. Things do change quite a bit, quite a bit, especially when you upgrade it, so it's better than this Macintosh. But even also with the Macintosh, there is a substantial improvement from totally new out of the box to broken in probably like a month later, is my guess, depending on how much you use it and how you use it, till the end of pretty much its lifetime, when it's reaching the end of this thing where it's getting tired, and you might have to change some of the components when it's 20-30 years old. Those are like three very different stages of like any piece of gear, especially the top gear out there. So sorry for making this a bit of a long video and being a bit weird about it, but no one is talking about it, and as with kind of everything on my channel, no one is really talking about these things. So I thought about, I should cover this topic because I've listened to so much gear from birth to middle of its birth to being broken into middle of its life to end of its life, and to being replaced, and upgrading gear with parts inside, and then listening to that develop. I've heard that process, and not many people in this world have heard this process unless they're probably very old. And I'm just here to share that with you guys, because it's one of those rich things that we can share with the people that don't necessarily have the same amount of experience. So yeah, I thought this was an interesting topic. So yeah, that's me logging off, and remember to like and subscribe if that's possible. Bye.